Welcome to the AIOps Evolution Weekly broadcast. This series features discourse on topics pertinent to the C-level conversation revolving the integration of artificial intelligence into the ever-evolving IT operations landscape. Discover trends and actionable tips for digital transformation, as well as the latest news on how AIOps is transforming business and government operations to create flow in their organization. And don't stay in the dark on the latest industry news. Join the AIOps Evolution community to stay connected and subscribe to the show at AIOpsevolution.com. Now, let's join our hosts, Sean McDermott and Bill Driscoll, IT thought leaders, visionaries, and the voices on the other end of the mic for the latest episode of AIOps Evolution Weekly.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's broadcast of the AIOps Evolution Weekly. My name is Sean McDermott. I'm your host, and my co-host, Bill Driscoll. How are you today, Bill?
I'm good, Sean. How are you doing? It looks like you're in a new location, different background there.
I am. I'm in. I normally out of Orlando, but this week I'm in my other office in Reston, Virginia. So I'm up here for the week. Yeah. So we got plans for the weekend?
No, finally going to be a little quiet. So just a normal weekend, not on the road like I've been the last few weeks.
Awesome.
Looking forward to that.
It's actually my birthday this weekend, so nothing really special.
Birthday.
Well, I appreciate that. Nothing really specially plans, but you know, just another weekend, another year. Once you get to a certain point, you stop counting, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. You want to talk a little AIOps before the weekend?
Yep.
Yeah, well,
that sounds great.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the back nine. So,
yeah, me too.
Let's talk a little about AIOps. So, we're going to talk a little bit about user experience. We'll talk a little bit about DevOps, and we'll also be talking about incident management. How's that sound
Sounds great. Sounds
awesome.
good.
So we'll kick off today with an article that I started looking at around. It's actually out of VentureBeat, and it's called "Why Experience First Networking is the Future of IT." And I think I sent this over to you to check out.
Yeah.
And it kind of starts off like what really kind of got me with this article was, by the way, it's heavily a lot of interviews by Juniper Networks in here about their Wi-Fi capabilities and things like that. So if you take that out of the picture, there's actually a couple of things in here that I thought were pretty interesting. And it actually kind of lends to some of the embedded AI stuff that we talked about in the past couple of weeks. But the first thing it kind of led off with that I thought was like literally the first sentence is experience is the new uptime. And I think that's so true, right? Because networks are becoming more and more self-healing, and really it comes down to ultimately your uptime is really just your user experience, right? And you can have a network that's up, technically up and everything looks good, but the user experience sucks, right?
Yeah.
And there's a whole chain of things that it could be. It could be the network, it could be latency, it could be all kinds of wireless interference, or it could be the applications and the firewalls or load balancers and things like that. But I thought that's what kind of caught my eye when I first saw this article. So I started reading a little bit more. Did you get a chance to check this one out?
Yeah, I actually did look at it, and I it's interesting. We've talked about embedded AI, and I think, it really ties AIOps to the future of networking, which is this experience first networking. And we talked about in the past where should AIOps be applied, right? And I think we're all traditionally used to, you've got your log system and you got your metrics and you have your events and you got to pull it all into one place so that you kind of tie that to the CMDB. And then finally, in real time, you're going to be able to apply machine learning and intelligence and make an impact. And really what this article is about, and the next one we'll get into, the theme is you got to be pushing AI to the edge. You got to, the decisions and the learning and kind of what the changes that need to happen to drive experience in this case, in the Wi-Fi, it's got to be that learning and that changes and the configurations and optimizations need to be happening in that domain. And so, there's a football coach that said, do your job. It's kind of, what does do Wi-Fi's job mean? What does do 5G wireless service mean, or software defined WAN mean? It really becomes, it isn't just getting the connectivity, just getting the uptime. Part of that job is deliver the experience and adjust yourself really to deliver that experience. And so I think that's, that was a kind of the key takeaway for me. I'll quote, it was a VP of enterprise marketing at Juniper. He said, you can argue that AIOps and really virtual network assistants are minimizing the need for dashboards the same way dashboards did for CLI. And I think it's sort of a really forward-looking statement, but I doubt, are we really going to be able to remove the need for dashboards or something for humans to look at and say, how are we doing? And so, while I think you can delegate,
it's funny you brought that up, that quote, because it's funny that you brought up that quote, because I actually had that quote too, right? And I thought that was a good quote. I don't think that it's going to replace dashboards, because we as a human species are very visually oriented. And it probably, what it does is it takes away the dashboards as the virtual network or the network operator's first thing, right, to look at. And I'm not really sure the dashboards were really a true dashboard is a summary, right? So it as a network engineer, you're probably not looking at dashboards in the first place. You're probably looking at event lists and things like that. But I thought what was interesting, and you made a comment just a second ago about, we're going to be pushing AI to the edge. I think AI is going to the edge no matter what, right? Because these vendors like Juniper and Cisco and others are going to be embedding AI into their devices, specifically for examples like this, where they're talking about configuration of Wi-Fi and automated changing of Wi-Fi, where using AI, and you're seeing maybe some signal congestion or overlap with competing signals, switching channels automatically, reallocating bandwidth, changing strength of signals across, if you've got 5 or 6 wireless access points inside of an office, and you've all of a sudden got a lot of video going on in the conference area, dynamically changing the signal strength of that conference room to consume more bandwidth. So I think it's going to happen no matter what. And it's just, I think ultimately these vendors, and I think this article was good as really an illustration of this kind of embedded AI that we've been talking about over the last few episodes.
Right. Yep. And I think that kind of takes us to the second
any
article.
other comments?
No.
Yeah.
I think,
let's talk about the second article.
Good. All right. So, the second article was written by another big vendor in the networking space, or, used to be compute, but also networking now, which is VMware, and really just talks about AI.
I've never heard of VMware before. Are they?
Yeah. VM. You want to write it down?
Yeah.
I think they're a big thing. They're up and coming. So AIOps.
Yeah, exactly. The newest up and coming technology called VMware virtualization. Yeah.
Exactly. So they're I think they're starting to branch out. They Velo Cloud. I actually don't know if it's an acquisition. I think it was in the SD-WAN space, and I think there's some rebranding happening here, but it's also definitely a space that's an application of SD-WAN, which is secure access service edge, and really what it talks about is, with work from home, with everything being cloud first, with things being decentralized, that there was a lot of deployments to the branch offices, to retail locations, whatever type of business you are, and using SD-WAN for that. We worked with one big managed service provider that managed a 5,000 store retail chain, and it was all SD-WAN network. But now that with home and with all the other locations that you're trying to extend the network to, these SASE, secure access service edge networks, are becoming more important, and managing them, is really another area where AIOps can apply. And so, I think it's just from a performance standpoint, security is obviously a huge part. But really all these things we just talked about, how, AIOps applies, centrally, but it also needs to apply in this space as well. And all the same use cases of mapping sort of all the devices, knowing the difference between minor issues versus like we have a major security issue. And so it's really, the article is really presenting how AIOps applies to this yet another sort of embedded or edge part of the network. So had you had a chance to look at it?
Yeah, I did get a chance to look at that, and I think that I had very similar thoughts than you, that pushing things out to, like we just talked about, right? Things are going out to the edge, and this to me is yet another illustration of just the vendors are going that direction no matter what, right? Yeah. They're using AI as a competitive advantage, right? And that was part of, back to that first article. I don't know if it's accurate or not, but Juniper basically using their AI that they've invested in and started 5 years ago, and they call leading AI platform, whatever, everybody's leading, but using that technology as a differentiator with virtual chatbots and things like that. So all these vendors ultimately are going to be deploying AI in some way. I think it's in the case of VMware, it's going to be AI driven by software. I think what's really exciting is looking at AI driven by embedded in hardware and firmware, and because then you're truly on the edge, right, on that point, and AI is being done much like Apple is doing with the phones, right? They're pushing a lot of the Siri AI onto the phone and letting it actually self-learn on the phone, and not necessarily pushing a lot of things back up centrally. But the ultimately, I think the vendors are going this way, and I think this is a good thing, right? Because we've talked about this in the past, that I think that there's going to be a lot of companies out there that this aren't going to be able to build the teams needed and have the expertise of doing advanced AI things without the help of vendors helping them along the way.
Yep. No, I completely agree. And one of the things I noted was just, network config management tools has always been a space that has struggled to get traction. I don't know how many companies now are using sort of centralized network config management, and I think now you're seeing, controllers come into play, like you see a lot with SD-WAN, and that's where the config management's happening. It's no longer just a simple element management system. It's you're doing the config, and the machines are really doing the configuration management now in the network. So
yeah, it certainly makes it more scalable too, right? Yeah. So when you got SD-WAN, and you've got VMware with embedding SD-WAN into their platforms and being able to do centralized policy management and pushing those things out, that becomes a very scalable solution. Right. And so it's exciting stuff, and I think it kind of goes back to the first article. Good connection there of networking and the introduction of AI into kind of self-healing, self-configuring, reconfiguration based on data coming in, packet loss or packet any kind of network performance anomalies, being able to instantaneously look at lots of different points at a single second and be able to make a decision on reallocation of network resources is key, right? And it's key to kind of back to that first article on user experience, because it's funny, like you and I have been around the block for a long time. You've got people who, when there's something wrong, you used to blame the network, right? And then the network guys would be like, it's not our problem, and then you turn into, an outage goes on for 5 or 6 hours because everybody's kind of pointing the fingers at each other. Hopefully we can, with these technologies, we're resolving issues faster.
Yeah, the machines won't be pointing fingers at each other so much.
Yeah. Well, we call that mean time to MTTI, mean time to innocence, right? So how fast can you tell everybody like it's not your problem and drop off the P1 call, and then the last guy standing, I guess, is stuck with the problem. So that's right. Not necessarily what senior leadership IT leaders want to hear, but I think MTTI is actually a real thing. So this is all really good leading up stuff, right? Because we're talking about network configurations, we're talking about network performance, and in the past, any kind of network performance would create some type of alert, which would then create some type of event and then an incident, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now there's a pretty interesting article out by Solar CIO, I think is
Star CIO.
Star CIO. I was close. So
yeah.
Well, like a little more Cosmo, I guess, if you're a star. Well, a solar is a star, right? So I guess I was close.
That's right.
So Star CIO put out an article. I haven't read anything from Star CIO. It looks like he's got a pretty interesting little blog going on there with some resources and things like that.
Yeah, a lot of a lot of his stuff around Big Panda, which we're not plugging any particular vendors, but it seems like he's very aligned with them and writing some things, thought leadership really aligned with that product.
Yeah. Which isn't uncommon, right? I mean, we just saw that with the first article. I made a comment. It seemed like it was a Juniper advertisement, but hey, that's how the world works, right?
Yep.
So, but this is called 10 Important Steps to Modernize Incident Management with AIOps, and it's not a very long article, and the 10, so. The 10 areas that they're looking at, like first one is institute observability standards into the application development phase. And oh boy, I mean, I've been talking about this for 30 years, right? I mean, I'm an operations guy. I've always been an operations guy. And how many times do we get things thrown over the operations fence without really a lot of ability to instrument it and things like that? I mean, I remember working for a large government client, and they were deploying a VoIP service, and they literally could not manage it. So it went back into the engineering organization, was delayed almost 6 months because operations was never taken into account. They weren't consulted. But, number one, institute observability standards up front, all good stuff. Been talking about it for years and years and years. And best practices for what people need to be doing as far as building applications and making them operational ready, which is kind of the core of DevOps in the first place. So what about you, Bill? Anyone pop out at you in particular?
Yeah, it's interesting. The way I sort of alluded to this in my comments on the first article. This is almost like the opposite article of the first two, right? Where the first two was push AI out to the edge. This is very much focused on what Big Panda does and some of the other managers do in the AIOps space, which is centralize everything, pull everything together, and you have your log tools, you have your metrics tools, observability standards have been defined, so what events, what logs, what metrics you need to pull that in, and then integrate with the CMDB to do some enrichment and kind of map and provide that context, and then he goes further and talks about SLOs and air budgets, and so now you're not just looking at what's happening in the environment, you're comparing it against what's expected, right? Or what's within the range, the guardrails, I guess, for acceptable performance among all the different components. And so I think that's what stood out. That's really the traditional approach of kind of bringing this all together. And I think the challenge with it is just, and I think it's the right approach for customers to take to some extent, but it isn't the only approach. I think some of the things we talked about earlier is important. But I think what trying to achieve this is really the holy grail and a challenge to do it, especially in real time, to be able to kind of have real time context, topology, all the relationships, map that to your logs and events and metrics, and then make sure that you can make sense of it all, right? And this is really about an incident pipeline. So it's doing all of this messy work and leveraging machines to be able to get clean incidents into where humans actually can do something. And
well, so I asked you for
I think
one.
He does lay out a really strong sequence.
Yeah, and you gave 4 of them. So
go ahead.
Congratulations on your efficiency there. But yeah, so you did basically 2 through 5, which is good because we don't need to go into all these in detail. But again, I agree. Mapping, enriching data with CMDB and topology meshes. I mean, that's you got to do it, right? I mean, if you're not mapping your CMDB, then you're not going to get to any kind of root cause analysis because you don't know connectivity, you don't know causality. So nothing here is really, in my mind, kind of blowing me away innovative, right? It's kind of like a lot of what we've been doing in operations for the past 20 years or 15 years with AI kind of thrown in there, which is really the whole point of what we've been talking about here anyways. I think, the one that really kind of was near and dear to my heart was number 6, and that was implement a center of excellence around automation. And automation is this. I mean, I started a company called RealOps back in the day, and we were the first runbook automation platform on the market, and eventually sold it to BMC. And so automation is kind of in my DNA. And we always talked about this 15 years ago. About, look, in order to really get good at this, you're going to have to build a center of excellence around automation, because it's the real power of automation is when you're automating end to end. There's not a lot, there's incremental value in doing small automation scripts and things like that. And you got knock operators who write scripts all the time, right? But when you start integrating multiple applications together to create a longer end-to-end automation, then you can start really scaling and doing some really impactful things. But it takes a team, just like with AIOps, when we talk about a team of data scientists and business analysts and translators and engineers. You need the same thing on the automation side, right? You need process people. You need architects that know how to integrate these applications together. You need middleware people to actually technically, physically connect these applications and these systems together. So near and dear to my heart. I'll do one more, and then I'll let you kind of close this one out. But leverage AIOps platform for open machine learning, right? And we talked about this, I think, last week, right? About how do you actually, we have a podcast. Season 2 of the AIOps Evolution podcast is coming out in October, and we're already in production on that. And I had a conversation with somebody about this the other day, and one of the key things is being able to deliver AI or machine learning models and algorithms in a way that is consumable to a general IT organization. And I think that's what this list is talking about. Number 8 is being able to deliver and leverage the out-of-the-box algorithms and models. And especially for, like I said earlier, especially for organizations that may not have the talent or the skill sets on staff to do it themselves.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I'll just comment on the last couple about operational practices needs to transform and sort of getting into changing the culture with agile methodologies. I think the big thing in all of that is really about exposing information. And I think the good thing about getting folks onto a common ITSM platform and getting them onto a common AIOps and kind of a central manager platform is you're now providing information, and information's free, it's available, and it's organized and it's centralized so that everyone has access to that. And I think once you sort of open up the box and let anyone, depending on whatever domain you're in, to be able to look across domains, to collaborate and work from the same sheet of music, that changes. And then now you have machines being able to do some of that work for you through automations, but seeing and observing it as it's happening, or observing the results of it, I think is going to really changes some cultural ways of doing business and cultural ways of kind of doing operations. And so I think that's an important thing, is you can't just be implementing the tools. You've got to look at, all right, how is this going to transform the way our teams operate in a much more
I'll just kind of make one last comment on that. And this is something I've said a lot to our customers, that you need to start looking at AIOps as a product strategy, right? And what I mean by that is, if you were a software company and you're trying to build a product, you're going to have a product manager, right? And the product manager is going to be the one interfacing with your customers and understanding requirements and translating that into, and prioritizing what should be done and translating it to the R&D team and working with them. If you're going to be embarking on an AIOps strategy, you really need to be thinking about a dedicated product manager for this too, and that in that context of understanding what are you trying to do with AI, with the AIOps, what are the use cases, where should you be focusing, what's the priority of things, and really kind of lay that out and let them. And I'm not talking about a project manager. I'm not talking about somebody who's got a spreadsheet or a Microsoft project that's managing that. I'm talking about a true product manager who's got vision of where you're trying to go, and has enough of the understanding technically to be able to kind of orchestrate that process and that timeline and the prioritization and things like that. So,
point.
Anyways, so I think that's it. Got anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think that wraps it up pretty well.
Well, it was great catching up with you again this week. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this week. This is our broadcast, as always, is sponsored by Windward Consulting Group, the leading AIOps, the global leader in AIOps. And you can find out more about them at www.windward.com. And also check out our AIOps Evolution podcast season 1. That's on all the podcast platforms, and look forward to season 2, where we're going to be focusing a lot on the vendors and talking to about a dozen vendors and their technologies and differentiators. And that will be coming out in October. So with that, enough of all the plugs, and I'll see everybody. We'll see everybody next week, and take care and have a great weekend.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation about AIOps and the future of IT operations. Interested in a deeper dive on these topics? Check out our resources available at AIOpsevolution.com. And remember to subscribe to get the latest episode.